Is Brady Moore. Hi, my name is Brady Moore. I am born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm the author of the Clairvoyants series. It's about Rion Grean, who's a 17-year-old African-American teenager who discovers that he has the power of telekinesis, and he discovers a world of other clairvoyants with powers similar to his, and a underground war going on between the clairvoyants and the secret organization that wants to eradicate them.
Yeah, it's a really good book. So I guess we'll get into the questions. What inspired you to pursue writing in addition to your other careers, and why young adult fantasy specifically?
So I grew up a huge fan of superheroes from as early as I can remember. It was Ninja Turtles, and then it was Power Rangers, and then Batman and X-Men. And so like I loved superheroes growing up, and me and my older brother, we used to come up with our own superheroes, and like the typical little brother, I usually just copied off of his until I got older and kind of started to come up with my own characters. And the Clairvoyant series actually came about when I was in high school. It was just an idea that I had. A lot of inspiration came from X-Men, and the character Jean Grey was one of my favorites, and I just kind of thought, it'd be really cool to just split her powers up into different characters and just create a world from that. And the young adult genre for me, I think it's one of the genres that really allows you to just touch a lot of different demographics. When you think about just science fiction movies like Star Wars and the Marvel movies, like people of all ages can really love those movies because a lot of the things that happen in young adult series is like the coming of age stories are things that we all kind of go through at times. So it's something that a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, I think that's true. So can you describe your purpose in writing the Clairvoyant series? I think you touched on it a little bit, but what do you hope readers take away from reading your book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that clairvoyance is kind of about, I think, is really just dealing with family and coming of age, kind of finding your place. Um, the first book really it's about Ryan coming into his own, and he has these powers, but he's really kind of just living in his own little bubble, and then he discovers other people out there, and dangerous people and people that he really likes, and then he just kind of has to use his upbringing to kind of forge his own path, and in that process he kind of changes who he is and kind of really becomes the best idea of himself. And I think for me, when I went off to college, it was kind of just a really different, you learn so many different things about the world when you leave that umbrella of being at home, and you have all these different personality types that you're around, and you kind of just you have the moral code that you were established with back home, but you have these other things that kind of influence you for better or for worse, and you really become your true self at that point. And for me, that's what with clairvoyance, with Ryan, his story really begins when he separates from his mom and has all these new people that influence him in different ways, and he kind of has to forge his identity through that. And I think that's something that everybody kind of goes through, and really is the catalyst for really most of people's adult lives, is that moment where you're no longer at home and you no longer have your parents to kind of fight your battles for you.
Yeah, I know you're talking about like the different personality types that you meet when you leave the house, and I think you did a really good job of that with like the group, like I guess friend group that you made for Ryan. So I know you talked about it's a series. So what is the structure of your series, and what is your favorite book in the collection, and why?
Well, I always had planned on the series being a trilogy. And when I think of a trilogy, I always think of Star Wars, because I think it's just the perfect way of establishing this story, where you have the first story where you have the character kind of coming of age and the call to action, and then the second story is really the darker one, and you have all these kind of conflicts come to a head, and you have the resolution and everything, and the hero coming into his own in the third movie. And that's how I always wanted this series to be. It's kind of how I always planned it out. And with the fifth strain that's releasing, it really was, I always planned on it being my Empire Strikes Back. Like I wanted it to be the story that when it ended, people were going to be like, oh my gosh, like how, where do they go from here? Like what does Ryan do now? So and that for me was the joy of kind of writing the second one, because I think the first one was really just about Ryan and him coming of age. I think book two is more so Ryan is just like the reader and discovering more about the clairvoyance. Ryan is, now that he's become ingrained with these other characters, now he's really seeing all the trials and tribulations that they've been through, and really understanding, okay, how did this close knit group, how did they separate, and how have they been coping with their powers. And then I think book three, which obviously is not out yet, but it's coming. Um, for me, that one's is going to be, I think, the best one, because I think there's a lot of things that people who read the first book, all these questions, all these things that they wondered about, book three really answers everything. And I think for people who really enjoy the first book and people who enjoy the second book, I think they'll have a lot of satisfaction going into the third book and having all these questions answered and having all these conflicts kind of come to a head.
Yeah, looking forward to reading it. So, how has your formal education translated to your writing?
Well, I graduated from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I majored in media studies. So I did a lot of film classes, a lot of script writing classes, and I'm a huge movie. I fell in love with movies before I fell in love with reading and writing. And I've been told that that clairvoyance has a very cinematic feel to it, and that's probably because that's what I grew up with. That's what I really loved, and it really helped me kind of become really obsessed with the nuances of storytelling, um, just different perspectives of different characters and putting them in different environments. And I guess just having characters have a lot of different just layers to them. And when I look at clairvoyance, yes, you have this overarching villain, but you have so many different personality types within the characters and the supporting characters themselves, where, you know, characters that might be seen as villains aren't necessarily villains. They're approaching things from a different perspective. And the characters that might be at the beginning of the book seem like they're the good guys, well, are also not willing to fight for what they believe in. So just having that aspect of, you know, people deal with things differently doesn't necessarily make them bad people or good people. Everybody kind of has both elements of that within themselves, and you kind of have to learn how you're going to react to different situations. And that kind of fight or flight mentality can sway whether a character is good or bad.
Yeah, I love that moral ambiguity, like sense of things. It kind of like adds a little bit more nuance to a story. So, I mean, everybody likes to write and wants to be a writer, but it's really hard to balance everything with your personal life. So, how do you balance your writing career with your personal life?
It's really difficult. With the second book, this was the first one that I written under a publishing contract, because the first book I basically wrote over the course of 7 years off and on. I would kind of come back to it, and if I didn't like something, I would just kind of work on something else, and then I'd come up with an idea, and then start back up. But with books two and three, I had to write them under a deadline, and so I actually found out my wife was pregnant with our first child a week after I got my publishing contract. And so I was still working a full-time job, and having a wife and a pregnant wife, and then my son coming along, and all that happened at the same time when I was writing two books. It was definitely challenging. It really tests really just your motivation. Because you have to be able to time manage. You have to be able to just work through your story snags, like your plot holes and the things that you might, it really sounded great in your planning process, but now you don't really love it when you're writing it. You really have to just fight through those things. For those problems, when I was writing the first book, I could just leave it for weeks and come back. When you're trying to hit a deadline, you have to kind of just work through it and just spitball ideas into something you really like. And it also really helps to have a great support system. My wife was amazing throughout the entirety, and she was great when it came to just giving me constructive feedback. She's always the first person who kind of reads the stories, and for her it's really difficult to kind of just keep from spoiling things for people because she's read the entire series. But it's really just a testament to having great people around you, having friends that'll say, hey, we can't hang out this time, but we're going to plan, with no problem. We don't hold it against you for not being able to hang out this time, because we know you're working on something. But when you get to days like release day, it really makes everything feel that much better, because all the work and all the time you put in and all the time you sacrificed. You're able to kind of get that back. But it's definitely something that you have to be intentional about.
Yeah. So, what's your advice for aspiring writers?
The number one thing that I tell people, I've had the awesome opportunity to speak at high school since I wrote the fourth Kinetic, which is awesome because that's the key demographic. And the one thing that I tell younger people, I think writing is no different from singing or acting. If you're getting into it because you want to be a millionaire, then that's you're getting into it for the wrong reasons. If your idea of being an author is, oh, I'm going to be the next, J.K. Rowling, or I'm going to be the next, James Dashner, that's not why you should do it. You should do it to do the best story that you want to do. You want to do it because you want to be, you love storytelling. And for me, I didn't even necessarily consider publishing the fourth Kinetic when I first wrote it. It was my family members and my wife who kind of pushed me to do it. Um, and you want to have people in your corner who not only are going to support you but give you constructive feedback, because you don't want to have a bunch of yes men around you, because then you're not going to be able to create the best story. And for me, between my literary agent and my publishers, like, I got excellent feedback. And so when it did come to them saying, hey, I think you should change this here because I don't think Ryan would react that way, I didn't fight him on it, because I was like, you're absolutely right. Based on the criticism and the positive feedback that they given me throughout, I understood that they knew what story I was trying to tell. They knew these characters just as well as I did. So when they give me that feedback, I'm able to, not frown at it or get upset or feel some type of way, but actually take it and make the story better. And I can definitely say the fourth Kinetic, it went through so many different incarnations, but the final version was absolutely the best version of it. And that's something that I'm really proud of, but that's something you can't have unless you really put yourself around people who understand what story you're trying to tell. And when you do things like that, everything else will come along, in time. But you always want to make sure that you're doing right by the story that you want to tell.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice. I know not all writers are millionaires. It's more about the heart and the passion you have for the storytelling. So, I think that's all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or add before we end?
Yeah, feel free to follow me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Be More the Auteur, AUTEUR, on Instagram and Twitter. And I love fan interaction. To me, it's really surreal to just kind of have people that, around the world reading a book that I came up with when I was younger, and people who actually fall in love with these characters. Like, Lyra has become this kind of cult this kind of cult character that I didn't even, it was just a fun character that I came up with, but people love Lyra. And yeah, I love fan interaction, and I love when people follow me on Instagram and things like that. And the fifth strain it's out now, so people can go and order and read it. And the sixth serum will be out in 2023. Can't wait for it. And I working on other projects as well. But yeah, follow me on Instagram and interact with me. I love it.
Okay, well, that's all for today. Thank you, Brady, for taking the time to talk with me. And for those of you watching, if you haven't already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.